Brussels. Let's speak to our correspondent, Kevin Ozebek, who joins us from Brussels. Kevin, I think you were listening in to that press conference. Talk us through in more detail these new proposals that we were hearing about from these two gentlemen.
Well, we just heard those commissioners say that the current system does not work. That's what's known as the Dublin regulation, which is the EU legislation that lays out how asylum seekers apply for asylum needs to be completely overhauled or at least altered in a pretty significant way. So the commissioners say they would like to very much explore in depth two options here. Now, option one would be practically scrapping the Dublin regulation as it exists today. And as you mentioned, as it does exist today, asylum seekers, the country that they gain entry in the European Union, has to review those asylum claims and then can either accept or deny it. Well, under this first option, the EU would redistribute asylum seekers across the continent. Now, depending on the wealth and the population of the European country, would determine how many asylum seekers the country would have to process. Option two that the commissioners want to explore would be adding what's known as a fairness clause into the current Dublin regulation. So let's use Greece as an example here, because that is the country where most refugees and migrants are entering Europe. If Greece says, hey, we have a major crisis on our hands, there are so many people trying to apply for asylum here, we can't handle this, we can't keep up with the volume, Greece can declare a crisis, and then other European countries could share some of the burden, take some of those asylum claims, and then process them. But now the question is, how will the EU, the 28 EU member states, react to these proposals that are being put on the table?
Exactly. I mean, these are just proposals, and they still have to be discussed, accepted between member states, and we've seen that for a long time now. The problem lies with the European countries who don't want to take these migrants in. So what happens next?
Well, great question, because that is such a lengthy process, turning this from a proposal into new or at least altered EU legislation. Eventually, this will have to be approved by the heads of state of all 28 EU member countries at an EU summit. We know, for example, countries like Austria have put in place very tight border controls and are only accepting a limited amount of asylum seekers because they don't want this huge influx of asylum seekers. So how will a country like that react to this proposal of redistributing asylum seekers across the continent? So it looks like this may be a very tough sell, but nonetheless, the Commission says it will at least try to push forward and speak to the European Parliament and other EU politicians to kind of gauge the reaction with this and see how they can move forward and proceed forward, and at what rate.
Okay, time will tell, Kevin. Many thanks for that. Kevin Ozebek joining us there in Brussels. So just to sum up there, EU just launching a new bid to reform the asylum rules in Europe.